The Mermaid of Zennor, from Zennor in Cornwall, England, based on the version in Traditions and Hearthside Stories of West Cornwall by William Bottrell, published in 1873. A long time ago, a beautiful stranger paid a visit to a church in the village of Zennor. She appeared at the church on a whim, enchanting the villagers with her melodic voice and stunning good looks. No one truly knew where this woman had come from, but no one dared to ask. The mysterious woman started to visit the church regularly and became well known by the congregation. The local men certainly enjoyed her presence, and one man in particular was especially charmed, Matthew Truella, the best singer and the most handsome man in the village. He seemed a perfect fit for the enchanting young woman, and so he took it upon himself to find out more about Zennor's mysterious visitor. One evening after church, he followed the woman as she made her way towards the cliffs, and soon after, they both disappeared. After that fateful evening, neither singer was seen again. Presuming Matthew to have been lost to the sea, life in the village continued, and over time, the story began to fade. That was until the villagers got wind of a story from a ship's captain who, having anchored his ship a mile away from nearby Pendor Cove, he had come face to face with a beautiful mermaid. She desperately pleaded with him to move his anchor, which had blocked the entrance to her home. He obliged, and she thanked him, allowing her to be reunited with her husband and daughter. Upon hearing the story and the man's description of the mermaid, the villagers concluded that this mermaid was likely the mysterious woman who had visited their church all those years ago. Knowing of the enticing powers that mermaids have over human men, the people of Zennor believed that the mermaid's husband was likely Matthew, or Matthie as they called him, the local lad who had apparently gone to live with the merfolk. The Mermaid of Padstow, from Padstow in Cornwall, England, based on the version in North Cornwall Fairies and Legends by Ennis Tregarthen, published in 1906. A long time ago, a man and Padstow local named Tristan Bird went to the old market, and there he purchased a brand new gun. Excited by his weapon, he tried it out immediately, accumulating quite the collection of dead birds and other creatures, and kills to his name. Growing in skill and confidence, Tristan began to seek out a bigger challenge. Spurred on by his ego and desire to impress the fair maidens of Padstow, Tristan made his way to Hawker's Cove, primed and ready for his next kill. Arriving at the cove, Tristan began the search for a worthy victim. But what he found there, sat by a pool, enchanted him so entirely that he quite forgot about his hunt. Gazing into the pool, aptly named the Mermaid's Glass, was, or what appeared to be, a long-haired woman. She was quite unaware of the young man who now stood behind her, and she continued to brush her silky hair. Peering over her shoulder and into the glassy pool, Tristan could see the woman's beautiful face and was instantly smitten. Eventually, she turned and greeted the onlooker. He began to flirt, remarking on her golden hair and sea blue eyes. Besotted with her ethereal beauty, Tristan begged the woman to marry him, but she rebuffed him, unimpressed by his boasts about his wealth and the size of his beautiful home. The woman once again replied that she could not marry him. Tristan's infatuation quickly turned to rage, and he became aware once more of the gun still in his hand If he could not have her, then no man could, he declared, holding up the weapon. The woman laughed. Unafraid of his threats, she simply warned that if he did indeed try to kill her, then a curse would befall not only him, but Padstow itself. But Tristan was too far gone to care. He asked her one last time for her hand, and her answer, the same as it always had been, was enough to spur him to lift his gun and shoot her right then and there. And that was when she wrenched herself from the pool in which she sat, revealing herself to not only be a beautiful maiden, but also a mermaid. Tristan, shocked, immediately regretted his actions, but it was too late. The bullet had hit its target. The mermaid gathered together what was left of her strength, using it to bestow a terrible curse upon the once safe harbour of Padstow, to forever be obstructed by a bar of doom, until the day Tristan's evil act was finally avenged. The mermaid took her final breath and fell down dead, and Tristan stared, overwhelmed with regret, into the blood-stained pool. That night, a terrible storm blew over Padstow, one more vicious than any other, and the next morning, a treacherous bar of sand had risen up from the depths, littered with shipwrecks and the bodies of the drowned. The mermaid's curse had come into full effect, and the harbour was no longer the safe haven it had once been. After that, it was said that whenever a new ship was wrecked or a sailor drowned upon the dreaded Doom Bar, that a mournful wail cried out across the harbour, not unlike that of a dying mermaid. The Seal Catcher's Adventure from John O'Groats in Caithness, Scotland, based on the version by William Grant Stewart in The Popular Superstitions and Festive Amusements of the Highlanders of Scotland, published in 1823. There was once a man who lived in a cottage near John O'Groats, with a magnificent view of the cliffs and the sea below, which was home to the local seal population. The man had chosen his home carefully, for he was a seal catcher, and he made his money from moulding their skins into all sorts of things, from clothes to purses, boots, and tobacco pouches. It was a misty morning when the seal catcher headed to the beach, searching for that day's prey. The young seal pups had already begun to break through the surf, but closer to the shore, a much larger seal had heaved itself up above the waves. A seal like this could become a waistcoat, a fancy purse, or perhaps even a sturdy pair of boots, thought the seal catcher. And so he took his knife and plunged it down into the large seal's exposed back. It groaned, but this seal was different to the others the man had encountered. It was larger and stronger. It thrashed its way out of his clutches and fled back into the depths, the empty knife still protruding from its back. That was a problem. Not only the loss of the seal, but the knife too. For it was a family heirloom, a knife that had killed and skinned seals for generations. It would be difficult to find another tool so skilled at its job. And besides, this one had sentimental value. That was priceless. Without the knife, no more work could be done. And so, the man returned to the shore and the young seals to the depths. That evening, the seal catcher lay down to rest, or tried to, despite the wild storm that raged outside his cottage. Thunder, lightning, wind, and waves all hammered at his windows. But then, amongst the din, he noticed something odd. Knocking. Half asleep, the seal catcher shuffled to the door. And outside, Waiting patiently despite the storm was an unfamiliar man, wrapped head to toe in an alluring dark grey coat. The stranger tipped his hat, informing the seal catcher that he had come on urgent business. A wealthy local wished to purchase a large quantity of seal skins from him and had insisted that they make a deal that evening. The seal catcher was surprised. He had never been approached for business at his own front door before, but the prospect of such a large order excited him. The stranger told the seal catcher that a deal could only be made in person and that he should come with him that very minute to meet his employer, or the purchase would no longer be required. The seal catcher paused for a moment to make sure the stranger knew he was deeply considering the proposition, although he already knew that he would accept without hesitation. A large sale such as this could see him through the winter months. It was simply too good an offer to refuse, despite the ominous way in which it was proposed. Together, the men mounted the stranger's black steed and they travelled through the storm at such speed that the stars in the sky whizzed by as one bewitching blur. Eventually, the horse slowed and the seal catcher rubbed his eyes. They were, it seemed, at the edge of the rugged cliffs of Duncansby Head. A strange place for a meeting, thought the seal catcher, searching for signs of life on the empty precipice overhanging the stormy sea. The stranger dismounted and the seal catcher followed suit. "Where is this wealthy man?" he asked, beginning to worry that his guide had not been as honest as he first thought. "Be patient, you shall see," said the stranger, and then, without leaving his companion time to think, he grabbed the seal catcher by his coat, pulling him into an embrace so tight it forced the breath from his lungs. The seal catcher tried to speak, but it was too late. Before he had time to process what was happening, the two were falling, head first, off the cliff face and down towards the unforgiving waves below. Down and down sank the stranger and the seal catcher until they reached the seabed, where, unbelievably, stood a weathered door. Whatever the stranger had done to the man had changed him, for his lungs no longer burned with the strain of held breath. He felt as though he could stay under the waves forever. He turned to his companion, then recoiled in shock, as he found the stranger had now taken upon the form of a wide-eyed seal, his grey skin matching the long coat he had been wearing just moments before. The stranger grabbed the seal catcher by what had once been his wrist and pulled him through the underwater door. On the other side, resting in their own little compartments, were a group of people. No, not people. Seals. Their eyes were impossibly dark and their skin smooth and grey. The seal catcher panicked, outnumbered by the creatures that he had dedicated his life to hunting. But despite this, they did not seem vengeful. In fact, he could easily spot something recognizable in their rounded glares. Sorrow. The seal, that had once been the human stranger, drifted towards the seal catcher, an object glinting in his webbed flipper. Realizing what it was, the seal catcher rushed backwards, fearing that his underwater end was now imminent. But the stranger spoke calmly, somehow in the same unmuffled tone as he had done on land, asking the seal catcher if he recognized the silver blade in front of him. Leaning closer, the seal catcher realized that he did. He had handled that knife almost every day of his adult life. It was the same knife that he had lost to the large seal that very morning, if it was indeed only hours that had passed between then and now. How was his knife here, in the realm of these creatures? The stranger led the seal catcher through the crowd towards another underwater door to a quieter, more private room. And there, on top of a rocky bed, lay a large seal, perfectly still. The seal catcher was unsure whether the creature was alive or dead, as his skin was even ghostlier than the rest of the seals he had passed by. But the large seal, sensing their presence, turned slowly, revealing a nasty gash across his delicate back. The stranger informed the seal catcher that the seal they now stood before was his father, an important member of their community of Selkies, a shape-shifting race of creatures able to take the form of humans or seals on land or in the sea as they pleased. But now, because of the seal catcher's actions, his poor father was badly wounded and nearing death. The only way to save him now was with the forgiving touch of the one who had originally bestowed upon him the mortal wound. And that was why the stranger had brought the seal catcher here to the seabed, to save his father's life. The seal catcher looked upon the Selkie's wound, realizing that he had become so accustomed to death that the thought had never occurred to him that he might, one day, be required to save a life. Seeing the wounded seal lying there with his eyes closed, struggling with every moment, he knew what he had to do. With one impossible breath, he placed the flippers he now found in place of his hands over the open wound. It took a few moments, but soon the wound had completely vanished, and the large seal rose from his bed, thanking the stranger with a flip of his tail. The other Selkies swam forward and rejoiced, a sorrow within their eyes replaced by joy. The seal catcher too was happy, but part of him wondered whether he would remain metamorphosized into seal form for the rest of his life. The stranger, perhaps now a friend, assured him that they would both return unharmed to the shore, as long as he promised never to maim or kill another seal ever again. "I promise I will never kill a seal ever again," he repeated. The great seal nodded his approval, and his son took the seal catcher by the fin, brushing him back to the surface. As their heads broke through the surf and greeted the dawn, salt air rushed through their lungs once again, and their blubbered exteriors melted away as they returned to human form. The return journey was swift, and soon they were back at the familiar front door of the seal catcher's John O'Groat's cottage. The men shook hands, but before the Selkie man turned to leave, he placed a small bag into the hands of the reformed seal catcher, then hurried away towards the sunrise. Back in the safety of his cottage, the ex-seal catcher fiddled with the parcel given to him by the stranger, the only tangible thing left from his impossible adventure. To his surprise, it was filled with a glinting pile of gold coins, which he poured out onto the table. He counted them over and over with the brightest smile, knowing for sure this time that he would never harm or kill another seal ever again. The Skinningrove Merman, from Skinningrove in North Yorkshire, England, based on John Graves' account. In 1808, The History of Cleveland in the North Riding of the County of York, and Folktales from the North York Moors by Peter N. Walker, published in 1990. The fisherman tugged at the net as the weight of the unseen creature below thrashed and pulled. Could another pesky basking shark have gotten tangled up in the net? Or perhaps another short fin? It certainly seemed much stronger and more agile than anything they had captured before, and it took the combined effort of all the fishermen aboard to eventually heave the sopping net up and onto the deck. The bundles splashed to the floor, and the men stood aside to catch their breaths. and get a proper glimpse at what they had just reeled in. Well, it was no basking shark, that was for sure. Amongst the wriggling bass and cod was what looked like a face, a human face, staring back at them. The men were startled, but quickly leapt to work. Netting was tugged away and fish flung aside as the men pulled a quivering man out from amongst the fish, his eyes wide with fear and amazement. Never before had the Skinningrove fishermen come across something like this. They tried to tell the man that he was okay, that they had saved him from what surely would have been his watery grave. But his eyes still bulged and darted around like the writhing fish beside him. Back on land, the fishermen were joined by many excited villagers, each of them eager to see the man who had come from the sea. They placed him in an old house that had been empty for years, and so that became both the man's refuge and prison. For though this home was now temporarily his, he was kept under careful watch and was not allowed to leave. For the villagers were yet to know exactly who, or indeed what, they were dealing with. A young woman from one of the nearby houses came to visit the man in his new dwelling. Though it had been some time since he was pulled from the waves, he still had a look about him that was wild and windswept, as if he had been rescued that morning. The woman handed over a basket of fish that her family had carefully prepared for him. He grinned wildly, gratefully accepting the gift, and at once he began to feast upon the raw fish, with a hunger that suggested he had not eaten in some time. Soon, many other curious guests came by with a variety of different gifts. Breads, pies, and sweetmeats were all offered up to the man, but he shook his head and refused to eat anything except the raw fish that had been gifted to him. He ate without knife or fork, greedily savouring every bite. The villagers had no problem keeping the man fed, as fishing was their trade and there was plenty to go around. And though he seemed appreciative of their generosity, the man was unable to speak, except for in strange wails and shrieks, unlike anything one would imagine to come from the throat of a human being. Many of the fair maidens of Skinningrove would gather at the man's door, marvelling at his humble smile and the wild hair that messily grazed his shoulders. His eyes lit up when he saw the women gathering outside, and he gazed longingly back at them through the window pane, just as mesmerized by the women as they were by him. The man from the sea became a popular figure in the community, and though he could not speak, he was always patient and kind, and the villagers were equally fascinated and charmed by him. Eventually, the decision was made for the constant watch on his house to be retired, and the lock on his door removed. He was free. Though he had enjoyed his time amongst the Skinningrove villagers, the call of the sea was far too strong to resist. And so, one morning, he left his cottage and headed down towards the shore, gliding through the village as if in a trance. A few of the locals noticed the man as he passed by, but not one of them dared to interrupt him, as his eyes were wild and glazed in a way that they dared not interfere with. And finally, he reached the shore and screeched blissfully as the cold waves embraced him. He swam gracefully far out towards the horizon, but paused for just a moment to take a final glimpse at the Skinningrove shore and the small crowds that had formed on the beach. The villagers, despite everything, had shown themselves to be kind, and for that, the man was grateful. He gave them one last look and a gleaming smile before he turned and dived down, back beneath the waves from which he had come. The Mermaid of Dunnet Bay. From Dunnet Bay in the Scottish Highlands, based on the version in Sketch of the Civil and Traditional History of Caithness by James T. Calder, with historical notes by Thomas Sinclair, published in 1887. It was a bright morning, the first time the young man took the shortcut. He found himself walking a new route between Merkel and Castle Hill, which took him along a small footpath beside a sandy pool. As the clouds moved overhead, the man glimpsed down at the pool, and he caught sight of something illuminated beneath the water. It looked like, if he was not mistaken, scales glinting a delicate silver hue. Far too big and bright to belong to any kind of fish he knew. These scales had to belong to one of those sea maidens he had heard tell of in whispers, usually at the pub, of mermaids, the kinds that young sailors were enchanted by on moonlit nights and drowned by in stormy seas. The young man crept towards the pool to confirm his suspicions, and sure enough, a dazzling sea maiden rose up from the deep to greet him. It had been a long time since she had a visitor to her pool, so she beckoned over the young man with a smile he could not refuse. And so he left the safety of the path and gently knelt beside her. The mermaid and the man conversed for some time, beginning, like humans, with the weather. Then on to the differences between their two worlds, the sky and the sea, and how strange but lucky it was for a man to stumble upon a mermaid on his morning stroll. The hours soon melted away, and it became clear that a friendship was blooming between them. And so the young man and the mermaid agreed to meet at the same spot the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Man and mermaid met at dusk and dawn, day after day and night after night, and the two became well acquainted. The mermaid would bring the man treasures from the seabed, sparkling pearls, jewels, and necklaces of gold, all scavenged from shipwrecks sunk long ago. And after a lengthy chat, the young man would tuck the mermaid's gifts safely into a pocket, marvelling at how easily the sea maiden could acquire such treasure. As time passed, the young man soon became incredibly wealthy from his strategic sales and exchanges. His name spread far and wide, as did speculation of how he came to possess such riches. It was not long before his reputation as an eligible young bachelor spread through the local villages, and he found himself trailed by hordes of young women, desperate to get to know him better. Drawn in by the attention, the man gifted the local women with dainty jewellery, gold chains and diamonds, all which shone with the same glow as the sea on a moonlit night. Distracted by the new attention, the young man started to forget about the appointments he had made with the mermaid. He would rush over to their meeting spots, late, with excuse after excuse, promising never to forget her again. The mermaid believed the man for a while, until she noticed that he had begun to ask for more of her mermaid treasure. The golden necklaces and shiny jewels were never enough. He always wanted more. The mermaid had to remind her human friends that the gifts she brought him were just that, gifts, and he should accept them gratefully. He apologized and promised her that he would be more respectful. But still he knelt at the edge of the surf and filled his pockets with silver and gold, and the mermaid watched on. One evening, the man rejoined the mermaid at their usual spot, but he was late. The sun had already set, and the moon had taken its place, high in the sky. The mermaid was patient and brushed off the man's excuses. Instead, she led him across the bay to a small boat moored upon the shore, drenched in fresh moonlight. Excited, the mermaid told the man that she would guide him to a secret cave in which she had collected every treasure that she had found within the wrecks lost beneath the Pentland Firth. The man's smile illuminated, and he jumped into the waiting boat, and the mermaid swam ahead, guiding him through the darkness. The boat slipped silently inside the cave that was, just as the mermaid promised, adorned with treasures from sunken ships and hidden depths, lit by a small slither of moonlight. The young man spun, taking in his surroundings, excited by the endless possibilities and riches that a mermaid's stash could bring him. But suddenly, the boat rocked from side to side, and he was flung into the cold, dark water below. The mermaid cackled as she pulled up 2 glinting golden chains from beneath the waves. "I thought it was I that you loved," she said as she thrashed about in the surf. "But it is the gold, and now you shall spend eternity bound to it." The golden shackles snapped around the man's wrists, trapping him in the mermaid's cave, water up to his waist as the tide rolled in. The mermaid laughed and laughed as the man panicked and the water rose. And there, as some say, he still remains, bound by his golden chains, imprisoned in the mermaid's cave, doomed to watch the water rise and fall again and again, but never to be freed, for his greed will always keep him shackled. And that brings us to the end of this Folktales of the Sea storytelling collection. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed today's tales. Until next time, my friends. Goodbye.